You're watching VinylicPumaGaming. What's up, guys? So today I figured I'd do a little bit of an experiment and make a commentary that pertains to a subject that I feel should be discussed more within the Borderlands community. I mostly want to talk about how I think Gearbox Software should handle patches for both its current Borderlands games and future Borderlands games. Now, before I get into this video, I'm going to say that Borderlands is Gearbox Software's IP, and they can do as they wish with it. This video is mostly going to be suggestions on things that I think they can improve to make the game much more fun for everyone, both now and in the future. So I ask that if you watch this particular video, please do so with an open mind and think about some of the things that I'm going to discuss. One more quick thing, I just want to say that this video was inspired by another video made by YouTuber Core Gaming called Analysis: Why We Should Buff More Than Nerf. And his channel seems to be centered around like Street Fighter and fighting games, but I think his video is really good and makes some great points about the nature of video game buffs and nerfs. If you're curious, I'll link his video on this topic in the description. However, I will also summarize some of his ideas that he talks about in his video. I would say the number one takeaway is that game developers add nerfs and buffs not to balance their game, but to make their game both more fun and more enjoyable to play. The idea here being that focusing only on balance takes away from making a fun, enjoyable, and compelling gaming experience. Now, Core also talks about how players typically like buffs because it adds content and allows the player to adapt and have new strategies. He also discussed why players typically hate nerfs because of the idea of loss aversion, which is basically the idea that a loss will hurt twice as much as a gain will feel good. After all, negativity tends to have more of an impact on us psychologically than positivity does. He also says something else that's pretty interesting, and that's the idea that a broken game can still be very fun and enjoyable for the player to play, while a perfectly balanced game may end up actually being really boring. After all, making everything on par with everything else reduces the variety of options and strategies that are available to the player. But again, I'll leave a link in the description to his video if you want to check it out. So for now, I'd like to discuss how this affects Borderlands 2 and future Borderlands titles going forward. As was evident with both Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel, Gearbox's most common solution to fixing issues with the game is to nerf things. While Gearbox has certainly buffed some things before, nerfing is the most common technique that they use to make the game more quote-unquote fair. I would also say in all of these cases, even if some of the decisions were the right ones to make in retrospect, it certainly did piss off a lot of people within the Borderlands community. One of Borderlands 2's most infamous nerfs was to the B-Shield, and while I would agree that this was a good decision in retrospect because it encouraged players to check out more of the game's weapons and try new builds, it also did piss off a lot of people within the community at the time. By nerfing the B-Shield, Gearbox, in a sense, removed a feature from Borderlands 2 that many players used to easily farm weapons. At that time, drop rates for legendaries were much lower than they are now, and if it took longer to kill an enemy, that also meant that it would take longer for you to farm a specific legendary. Of course, another famous nerf was to Zero's kunai and Deathmark abilities. In an attempt to bring Zero more in line with other characters' damage potential, Gearbox decided to nerf these abilities, and what ultimately happened is that Gearbox broke Deathmark for multiplayer cooperative play. If two Zeros were in the same game, they each had to share the same Deathmark, as only one could be applied at a time. And while this was eventually fixed, again, it pissed off a lot of people. Either way, both of these nerfs were very painful because if you worked really hard to get a conference call and a B-Shield through farming, you basically had a feature that was present in the game taken away from you. To make matters worse, nothing was really added to replace what was lost. I think this is especially the case with Zero's kunai and the Deathmark nerf, as Gearbox essentially broke a skill in order to make their game more quote-unquote balanced. While they may have intended for this nerf to make the game more fun, I think we can all agree that it didn't really make Borderlands 2 more fun and enjoyable to play. All it really did was make Zero a little bit weaker, while other glaring issues with the game went on largely ignored. Something that you'll notice, and whether this is intentional or not, is that Gearbox tends to avoid buffs in their games. Now, that's not to say that they haven't ever buffed anything, but nerfs to achieve balance seem to be a more common practice than to perform buffs that make the game more fun and also help improve balance. I think we can all agree that the buffs to Maya back in October 2015 were awesome. Skills that were previously useless, like Cloud Kill, are now insanely powerful. In fact, they may be a little too powerful for balance purposes, but I think we can all agree that this buff made Maya much more fun to play. Even some of the massive buffs to items from the $100,000 loot hunt made Borderlands 2 more fun. Fans of Axton know that there is nothing more satisfying than acquiring a fastball and utterly obliterating a really powerful ultimate badass enemy in 1 or 2 throws. I also think we can agree that the critical hit damage buff to the Lady Fist was also welcome, as it made a gun that was already pretty decent into an amazing weapon for high level play, especially for gunzerkers that can benefit from the passive critical hit bonus. And speaking of Salvador, let's discuss Salvador, as I think he is a perfect example of the philosophy that I'm getting at here. Now, I'm going to say some things that will make Salvador fans get somewhat defensive, but the fact is that Salvador is ridiculously overpowered, he's broken, and he's a walking glitch, and there are a wide variety of reasons as to why this is. Unlike most other characters, Salvador can more easily benefit from passive weapon effects while dual wielding. While other characters can do this to a certain extent with the Flacker and Torg rocket launcher combo, Salvador's entire character is built around the idea of combining passive weapon effects together to become almost unstoppable. When you start to combine items like the Grog Nozzle and Unkempt Herald together along with Money Shot and Inconceivable, you suddenly get damage output that is unmatched by other characters and an ability to heal at a rate that is also unmatched by most other characters. Think about it for a second. In Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, can any of the other characters tank as easily as Salvador and also be able to deal massive amounts of damage at the same time? An argument could be made that Salvador should be nerfed in order to achieve better balance in Borderlands 2. The lack of passive weapon effects and the removal of money shot chains would bring Salvador more in line with the other Vault Hunters in terms of power. And I think we can also agree that a nerf to Salvador would piss off a lot of the Borderlands community. Now, this is because Salvador, in his current state, is a blast to play precisely because he is broken. And I've got to admit that it's really fun to occasionally be able to money shot chain somebody like Terramorphous and half of their health suddenly disappears. Now, the same thing goes with most of the raid bosses. The ability to utterly massacre these enemies as Salvador is really fun. If you were to bring Salvador more in line with the other characters to achieve better balance, that might end up being less enjoyable. Not only are you taking away features from your game, which pisses off some of the player base, but you're simultaneously making your game less fun in the process. Now, let's go ahead and we'll discuss weapons. It's no secret that Borderlands 2 has its fair share of amazingly overpowered and broken weapons. Just to name a few, you have the Sandhawk, the Norfleet, the Unkempt Herald, the Lyuda, and the Interfacer. All these weapons, in one way or another, are extremely powerful when combined with the right gear and/or right build. All these weapons are also desirable because they are so powerful, and hence, players want to actively seek out these weapons during their playthroughs of the game. Imagine if Gearbox were to nerf some of these weapons in order to achieve better balance. In the case of the Norfleet, maybe Gearbox reduces its damage and blast radius to be more comparable with other rocket launchers. Ask yourself this though. If the Norfleet was rebalanced in such a way to make it more in line with other weapons, what makes the Norfleet unique or exceptional? Furthermore, if the Norfleet was just as powerful as the Bada Boom, why would I go to the trouble of acquiring a Norfleet when I could just go kill King Mong for my Bada Boom? After all, what good is a Norfleet when it's not much better than what I've already got and is significantly harder to get? How would nerfing the Norfleet make Borderlands 2 more fun? And on the contrary, I think it's really fun to wipe out an entire room of enemies with 1 or 2 blasts. It's also no secret that Borderlands 2 is full of weapons that become useless in later playthroughs. In particular, most E-Tech pistols, E-Tech shotguns, E-Tech assault rifles, and E-Tech sniper rifles are inferior at higher level play. And there's also grenade or rocket-based assault rifles, and these are also useless at higher level play because these weapons can't perform critical hits. Instead of entertaining the idea that the Nerf fleet should be nerfed to attain better balance, shouldn't we be asking for Gearbox to buff weapons in an attempt to bring them up to par with more powerful weapons? We already know that the Borderlands community already seems to really like buffs. After all, the improvements to Maya and the improvements to specific weapons like the Lady Fist and Fastball were really enjoyed by the community. In the case of the Fastball, it was easily one of the worst legendary grenade mods in the game, but by greatly increasing its damage, Gearbox ended up turning it into one of the most useful grenade mods in the game. Now you may be thinking, what buffs would make Borderlands 2 better? Well, I've got two words for you. Buff Axton. If Maya is going to get some skill buffs and improvements, why can't Axton? After all, the ability to have more choices to tackle the later playthroughs of Borderlands 2 is going to make Ultimate Vault Hunter mode and even the earlier playthroughs of the game much more enjoyable. For example, Axton has Crisis Management, which is a skill that barely anyone uses because one of Axton's specialties is really low shield recharge delay and great shield recharge rate. Perhaps what Gearbox could do is add a certain amount of damage resistance when your shield is depleted, and also boost the damage bonuses the player receives when their shield goes down to accommodate Ultimate Vault Hunter mode. Maybe if this bonus was simply substantial enough, it could prove to be more useful and may allow for new ways to play Axton. The idea here is to make underused and less viable strategies more viable at higher level play. As far as items are concerned, why is the Cradle still awful after 5 years of this game being available to the public? Simply boosting its damage to ridiculous levels would make using the Cradle much more viable. And as it is now, the damage scaling on the Cradle is terrible and has been terrible since the game's launch. Or you have a gun like the Tulane. Why on earth does the Tulane still have self-slag when we already have a very similar weapon existing in the form of the Florentine that doesn't have self-slag? Self-slag is the #1 reason why players don't even use the Tulane because it's simply too risky to use. Removing this self-slag would make it much better and more viable as a weapon in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, where you have ×3 slag damage. Or more precisely, you take 3 times the damage as opposed to 2 times the damage when you're slagged. I also just mentioned E-Tech weapons in general, and I think many of them would greatly benefit from either a direct damage increase of some kind, or if they both had better ammo consumption and better critical hit modifiers. If there's a concern that they would be way too powerful for normal mode, simply make these weapons a little bit rarer. In fact, I would say most E-Tech weapons are fairly rare anyway, so there's nothing to really worry about. I think that your best bet too is to rebalance key weapons so that they are designed to be used in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode. Pearlescent weapons in particular are notorious due to them only dropping in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode and up, and somehow being worse than weapons you can acquire in earlier difficulties. Why on earth does the Unforgiven have to be balanced to accommodate normal and true Vault Hunter mode when it isn't even designed to drop in those difficulties? By making these weapons more powerful and actually good, Gearbox could probably justify making pearlescent weapons even rarer. So you may also be thinking, aren't nerfs necessary? Well, despite everything I just said, nerfs are necessary sometimes, but they should be used as a last resort rather than the primary action taken to achieve better balance. After all, remember that many players hate nerfs because they feel that they are losing a specific functionality in a particular game. And I think the goal of a nerf should be to make a game more fun and enjoyable to play, as opposed to making a game more balanced. Better balance doesn't always make a game more enjoyable, and I think in the case of a game like Borderlands, where variety is king, it can actually make your game less enjoyable. I've mostly talked about weapons in this video, but think about Gearbox's design philosophy as it pertains to Borderlands 2's pearlescent weapons. In an attempt to make these weapons more quote-unquote balanced, it ended up making these guns inferior to many of the other legendary weapons that the player could already acquire in the base game. Why even go to the trouble of acquiring a Tunguska when the Nerf fleet is always going to be better? And the same thing goes for the Maggie and the Unforgiven, or the Storm Sniper Rifle versus the Volcano Sniper Rifle. And it may have actually been better to make these weapons superior to their legendary counterparts, as that would make them more desirable and players would take the time to farm these guns. Now, this isn't to say that balance isn't important. It's just that I look at balance as a way of managing very chaotic and possibly unfair circumstances. So, let's say you make the Nerf fleet the most powerful rocket launcher in Borderlands 2. Well, make it drop from a boss that requires a team of 4 people to spawn. That way, the Nerf fleet becomes something that is overpowered and that a team of people have to achieve together. Assuming you don't have DLC, I would say that the Nerf fleet is fair, considering that you have to go through hell in order to acquire one, and even then, it's not always guaranteed. If I have to do something really hard in order to acquire an amazingly powerful weapon, I would say that's fair. Something I hope Gearbox does going forward with their future games, both Borderlands and not Borderlands, is that they try to focus on doing more buffs as opposed to nerfs. Ideally, for every one nerf that they have, there needs to be at least 2 or 3 quality buffs that improve the gameplay experience for everyone. And yes, while I think some people will still be upset over the nerfs, at least you're adding additional value to your game by providing players with buffs as opposed to reducing the value of your game by constantly nerfing things to achieve better balance. Ultimately, I think it's going to be a tough road for Gearbox. I just hope that they take the idea of buffing items, strategies, and other underused aspects of their game to keep it more fresh, because that way both new players and veterans alike have some great new ways to play. Alright guys, that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like, and as always, take care and I'll see y'all next time.